Hi everyone, I'm Bruce Howat, Chair of Waiuku Family Support. Welcome to another one of our podcasts. This is about us gathering the oral history of our organisation, and we meet some exciting people. Unfortunately, today's person isn't exciting because it's actually me who's going to be interviewed, and I'm just me as far as I'm concerned. So I'll let the story, and Will interviewed me, so I'll let the story tell itself.
Bruce Howat, welcome to your own podcast. You don't like me saying it like that, do you?
It's even more weird.
Putting the pressure on you. For viewers watching, they would have just seen you introducing this podcast, and I guess I should quickly say hello, everyone. I'm Will Fleming. I'm the guest interviewer here because normally you're interviewing our people for this 35th year anniversary of the Waiuku Family Support Network podcast. But we've flipped the tables on you today, and it's about learning a bit more about your story. And so, Bruce, I'd like to start by just giving you the microphone for a second to try and, it's hard. Your story is a journey, but how do we condense it down just to catch everyone up on the Bruce Howat that we have here today?
Okay. I'll condense it fast. I'm a former police dog handler. I've a retired ordained minister. I've been chief executive of a number of vocational educational institutions and organisations over the years, and technically now I've got my feet up taking it quiet, but I'm still engaged in the church in different levels and activities. I'm a chaplain to St John Ambulance, which I really, really enjoy. Don't get enough work from it, but I really enjoy it. And I'm also a funeral celebrant, taking quite a large number of funerals for Graham's Funeral Services. Now, as it's transpired lately, I'm starting to take funerals of friends of mine, same age as me, which is difficult to take guys that the last one I took, I'd known the guy since I was 11 years of age, and it was a bit tough. We've been mates ever since then, and so it's getting up close to 60 years that we've been friends, and to start taking those sorts of funerals is tough. But that's part of what I'm about. Is I care about people. I always have. That's the consistency thing through my whole working life, is taking an interest in people. And so when I retired to Waiuku, and I went to Waiuku District Combined Church, St Andrews, I found out the minister there I'd trained with, but he was a junior. He's only a whippersnapper. And I'd still tease him to this day about it. But one of the members of the congregation was on the board of Waiuku Family Support Network. And after I took my first church service, when Richard was away for one Sunday, she came up to me and asked me to come on to Waiuku Family Support. And I said, no, the time wasn't right for me. And then later in the year, she came back to me and said, Bruce, our general manager has resigned from Waiuku Family Support, and we're wanting to get a new one. Would you come in as an advisor to the board on human resources? Because I got a master's in management and human resource. And so would you be prepared to do that? I said, on one condition, you don't pay me for it, because what I've heard around the trap since I've been in Waiuku is really positive things about you guys. So I came in as a consultant, a free consultant to them through the recruitment process. And Karen Hyland, who's now the GM, was the outcome of that process. And if ever I've made a good appointment decision in my career, that's been one of the best. And so she accepted the job. And then Brian Crum, who was the chair of the board, had a word with me and said, Bruce, I want to step down because my business is expanding and I really don't have the time to put into it anymore. Would you come on the board and then take over as chair? And I said, so long as we do it in a tidy and seemly fashion. So I came on the board, and then Brian and I talked about it. And both of us actually, ironically, forgot to tell Karen what we were doing. And I'll never forget her face on the night of the AGM when it came to the elections of officers, and Brian announced that he was standing down and nominated me. And next thing, I went up the front to take over the chair, and I wondered, why is Karen looking like that? And both of us had thought the other one would tell Karen, and neither of us did. So, but it started me on my journey now with Waiuku Family Support, and that's over 3 years now that I've been chair and working with Karen and the team. And getting on in years, you tend to do a bit of retrospective looking at life. And I have a few things in my working life that are standouts for me. And Waiuku Family Support's up on the top of the charts there for me. It's I got 3 things in particular I'm extremely proud of, and I wouldn't like to differentiate between them. And Waiuku Family Support's one of those 3 that I just feel I was in the right place at the right time, and I was just one of the cogs that were doing it. Admittedly, I was in leadership role and all those positions that were the things that stand out in my career. But it is a we thing, because no one is an isolation from themselves. You work in harmony with others. And I just love the team there. I love the culture that's there, the caring for the community, the lack of moaning and groaning. We've had some short stay people, and that's because they don't fit that kaupapa. They do want to moan and groan. Whereas the ones that are the good long haul stayers and the ones that are there that are the leading lights, I've never heard them moan or groan about anything. I've never heard them vent over anything. They just are just pleasurable people to work with. And you just think, how can this organisation not succeed without it? I have influenced it deliberately, down the organisation, down a couple of paths. I've got to tell the backstory to one of them.
Absolutely.
I was a chief executive of an industry training organisation. I was in Wellington for the Industry Training Federation conference. And they started on the Tuesday night, we always did, and they ended on a Friday night. And they were nearly always in Wellington. And I was never based in Wellington, so I used to fly down for them. And what we called the graveyard part of the conference was the Friday after lunch, because we were all mentally packing our bags and just wanting to head home. And but on the agenda was this Māori Kaumātua was going to come and speak to us. And I was quite intrigued as to what he was going to say to us at that stage that would keep us alert. And he walked on the stage laughing, that delightful Maori hard case laugh. It's a cross between a giggle and a chuckle, and I just love it to pieces when they do it. And I was telling a mate about it the other day, and I said I just knew I was going to hear some amazing words of wisdom were going to come out of it. And he came on the stage and he says, "Oh, you bloomin' Pākehā, you honkies," he said, You talk about strategic plans and the 3 to 5 years. That's not even a business plan, that's shorter term. He says, and our people, we talk about 3 to 5 generations. That's a strategic plan. And he might as well have put a sledgehammer through my head, because I thought, he's 100% right. And so for future organisations I ran after that, that was the mentality I took into them. So when I came to Waiuku Family Support, and we went to Cook's Beach for a noho, and it was to be the board and the staff, which is an unusual approach, to work out the strategy. We just wanted to get the basics of it, so as a board we could work on it. But if you haven't got the staff buy-in, a strategic plan is just a useless piece of paper, to be honest. It's got to be everybody engaged. And so I told this story then, and I said, unless we're going to do it for 3 to 5 generations, what are we actually accomplishing? And one of the other questions I asked was, how many families do we have on our books that are actually already multi-generations? Because if we're doing that, that actually says something's not working. And so it actually shifts the dynamics quite strongly when you take a focus like that. And it actually took the focus away from the funding model, because our funders, the good ones, will give us up to 3 years of funding. Most of them want to give you 1 year of funding, as though you can actually accomplish something. When you've got families who've had crises for 2, 3, 4 generations, you're not going to flick that around in 3 to 5 years. It's a nonsense to think that. So one of my favourite sayings, it's a Scottish one, it's a proverb, is don't judge each day by the harvest you reap, rather by the seeds you plant. And so my philosophy, and that's what I will take responsibility for. It can be blamed depending on your perspective further down the track, but the trying to plant seeds with the current clients we're dealing with as to, do you want your next generations to carry on as you are? It's your call. It's up to you, but we will work with you and support you, because to make the change that you might want, you can't do it in yourself in the rest of your lifetime, because we can't as humans 100% change ourselves. We can't remorph ourselves. You're who you are. And you've got to accept that you're an okay person because you're still alive, you're still sitting, you're still talking with us. You're okay. You might be going through a mongrel period of life. We all go through those, for goodness sake. None of us are exempt. I know I'm certainly not. And I'm not going to bore you with those details in this podcast. But, we all try and do the best we can with life. And so if we can get a bit of help to say what you're going to do with your next generation, that's how we'll change things and do things so that your great grandkids are going to be in a completely different headspace to what you are. But they'll always say you were the turning point for all of us, because you saw things weren't on the right path for whatever reason. And it's not a criticism of person, but it's staggering how many people get concerned about where they are within themselves. And we need someone else to work alongside us to move that. And, for goodness sake, I've worked with chief executives, I've worked with prime ministers, to be honest. They all need help in that area. No one's exempt. I don't care what your position, what your profession, what your race, your creed, or anything like that is. We all need others, because by sheer nature, human beings are social animals. And as such, we need other social animals to say, are you aware how you're looking and how you're coming across? If you are and you're comfortable with that, that's fine. But if you're not, we can provide you some help in different ways, but it's up to you as to how you take it on, because we're not going to disempower you by saying you're not doing a good job. We will just journey with you, and you can call the decisions, and we'll just can put alternatives in front of you for you to make your decisions. So that's why I just love this organisation ahead of nearly everything else I've worked in, because we've got a team that are just wanting to make a better society for Waiuku and further afield, in fairness. And they care about people at every level. And Karen uses a phrase that I absolutely love. She says, we want to wrap the korowai, the cloak of healing and helpfulness around each person. So they're sheltered and wrapped up and feeling good about themselves because they've got this cloak of well-being. And it's just vital that every human being needs, no matter, say, who you are and what you are. You're kidding yourself if you think you're perfect. You're kidding yourself if you think your life's 100% right. Even when you're top performing, you still have personal human problems.
Yeah. I'll just put a little edit here, and I'll just check that our gear's still running, but we're all good.
Still looks like it is.
Yeah, perfect. It's the power of editing, Bruce. So, Bruce, one of the interesting points I wanted to pick up on is a while back you mentioned the word seed. I think it's really relevant.
Yes.
Because intergenerational requires a long time. Nature is a long time. And somehow Waiuku Family Support merges those two, and you do it in the artwork.
Yes.
Could you talk a bit about that?
Well, when we came back from our noho at Cook's Beach, and as a board with Karen and Wairangi, we had hours and hours of discussions, and we were trying to work out how could we write a strategic plan that actually had meaning and depth and didn't judge and didn't put people in boxes or compartments. And the moment you start writing words down or even saying them, you're doing that automatically. So we came up with this concept, and I say we deliberately because it was a genuine team effort, that our strategic plan is a piece of artwork of 4 trees growing, and the roots intertwine with each other and the branches touch each other, because Waiuku Family Support is not the answer to everything. We're part of a community of other agencies and the groups working to do the same. And as our community is a group within itself as well. But what that model did was, it's fascinating at a whole range of levels, having a piece of artwork, what it does, because when we first did it, we took it to the whole board meeting and said, what does this, I say, do you all agree with it? And everybody was in agreement. They loved it. It was cool. I said, now my question to you is, looking at that, what is the role of the board? And at first I think they thought I had funny things growing out of my face in different obscure parts. They certainly got some strange looks. And I said, the traditional model at a board is you spend a stupid amount of time, in my biased opinion, on the financials. Finances, money comes in as a result of doing things right. And money goes out because you're doing things right. If you don't get the doing things right formula right, you'll financially go belly up. No, end of story for that. But if you're doing things right, people will sit up and take notice of you, and they'll be wanting to put their money in there because they'll see you as a good, in British economic terms, as a good investment. And under a capitalist model, people love that sort of language. But when you sit back as a board and you look at this model of the trees, it actually says the role of the board is to make sure the right nutrients are going into the soil to make sure the tree stays healthy and strong. And that's actually quite a different ballpark, because if all you're doing is feeding in money in there, you're not actually treating the well-being of everybody you need to correctly. So it's dramatically changed the dynamics of board meetings for us. The interesting thing was, I go to lots of things representing the organisation, and last year, sometime during the year, when we weren't in lockdown, the Honourable Carmel Sepuloni was holding a thing out in Henderson for all the not-for-profits for Auckland, for the super city, and we're just in the cusp of it. So I went along representing us, because it was silly to take one of the managers away for a political thing like that. So I went to it, and towards the end of her talk, she said, there's one of the organisations in your region that has done something dramatically different, because for all your funding, you have to put in a strategic plan, and they sent us a picture of their artwork. And she said, at first we got the giggles, and then it took a couple of days for it to register with us, and then we realised the power of what they'd sent us. And we'd actually like to challenge all organisations that apply to MSD to actually develop a piece of art that says what they're about.
Wow.
And I just sat there, and one of the guys that was along from me, he knew me in it because we've been to a few other things, and he said, I bet you that was your outfit. I said, yes, it was. and that was the first I knew that the impact we'd had on government by taking the approach we'd had. And because it's a holistic approach when you do that. And it took us away. So that goes back to the seeds that we plant. You know, I'd planted a seed about this vision of being intergenerational. Waiuku Family Support have taken that seed of going intergenerational, and they're making it come alive and have meaning. And my job in lots of ways has got a lot easier because of it. It's, I still get engaged. I go and attend lots of more what I'd call on the political side of meetings, and strategic side, but in fairness, Karen has also, as GM, got to go to some of those, but we divvy those up. And I went to one the other night with the swearing in of all the Franklin councillors and all that sort of stuff. And from a networking perspective, I was glad I was there. I made some very good networking contacts, and that's going to be useful for us. But also the fact that people in the room knew that I was there and who I was representing made us visible to a wider community that we wouldn't do. And some of these things, would I'd be much rather at home having a quiet night? Yes, I would, but for the good of the organisation. And that's part of what I learned as a chief executive. You have a responsibility to turn up and be the face of the organisation, whether you like it or not. That's what you do. And some of them, people could say, what did you accomplish by that? If you go into the capitalist measurement systems, probably nothing. But then a year or two later, when someone gives you a phone call and follows up and says, I met you at such and such and blah, 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 and suddenly things happen.
Yeah.
And that's the nature of how most businesses operate in reality.
And from a nature point of view, that's how nature works.
100%.
Yeah, and I really like that. Let's stay on that for a second, because you had a really interesting podcast with Sue Ushaw.
Yes.
And I assumed, like every assumption, a human assumption, that, everyone knows each other for this last 35 years, but you told me you had never met her.
No.
And so for those who don't know, Sue founded Waiuku Family Support Network, or had a part in it, and your job was to connect. And I think what was really interesting is, if we talk about the seeds metaphor, you tell it through your words, Bruce, but it was really nice to hear that those seeds were still the seeds that are recycling.
I must admit, I got goosebumps at this question. I asked Sue, what were you trying to accomplish when you set up the organisation? What was it to all be about? And she said it was 100% set up to be bicultural, and it was to be a bicultural journey. And that was part of the deal that I came on board, that I wasn't prepared to do it unless it was a bicultural journey. Yeah. Now, bicultural doesn't mean you're ignoring multiculturalism, because there's validity to the argument that you can only get two cultures into a conversation at once. Because the moment you bring in a third, the water gets so murky you lose it. But we've also got to, well, I shouldn't say got to, because that's bad grammar and everything like that. But it's more constructive to actually acknowledge Maori are the tangata whenua, they're the people whose land this is, and we respect them for that. And they, therefore, have got to have a voice in everything and anything that we do as a society. And, and Sue and I talked about that with the racial stuff that's gone on. And there's been more stuff on since, because there was another documentary in between our podcast and this one, whereas it was a detective who investigated serious fraud stuff at the major level. And and in New Zealand, per day, there's over $1 billion disappears in fraud. And it's affectionately called white collar crime, because I'm sorry, not picking on the brown people, but there's no brown people doing it. And in fact, in one day, there's more white collar fraud goes on than 10 years of benefit fraud goes on. We've got the system so wrong, because I'm still seeing the same family names pop up that I was dealing with as a cop are still popping up, which says we haven't got the formula right. And what kind of example are we setting to people? And we'll say, if you've stolen $30 of benefit off us, we're going to send you to prison. But when someone is like South Canterbury Finance, he was a good Christian man who had embezzled millions and millions of, I think it was getting up close to the billions of dollars that he embezzled, he was allowed to go have bail and all sorts of conditions that we never give to a benefit fraud person. So what are we saying as a society? So that's why I go back to the seed. If we plant the seed and we treat the people of the land and tangata whenua correctly, the rest of society will come into correct place. We'll get our values right, because I genuinely mean it. Our values are not right as a society when we think someone is only doing white collar crime, because the word white is proved to sanitize it all. And yet it's morally reprehensible, because I've actually had friends who have lost their full retirement savings through white collar crime, and yet no one goes to prison from it. And when this guy quoted the stats that we actually get about 3 people a year convicted of white collar crime, because the political parties will not actually change the legislation to make that a more serious thing, will not take the police resources off it, because it's a lot harder work to prove and to get there, and we'll go out there and jump up and down about kids doing ram raids instead of looking at the social conditions that have created that environment. We take the easy way out, and the populist propaganda of politicians, and I'm not picking on any one particular party, although I could go down that path, but I won't, is that, we've got, our priorities are wrong as a society, and that's why I love Waiuku. I'll keep going back to why I love it, because that seed is saying we're going to grow a new tree that doesn't actually exist at the moment. And it's a seed that actually celebrates people, celebrates their lives, and gives them dignity, respect that they deserve just for existing. Yeah. And none of our systems in this country actually really do that. So that's a bit of my waffle about why I do what I do.
It's good waffle. 2 final questions. First, if we touch base in another 35 years, or somebody touches base for us, what do you hope the story is then?
I hope it's a completely different story. The perfect scenario is that Waiuku Family Support would never need to exist. That's the perfect scenario, because we'll have systems in place that people can manage and sort themselves out as a community without any professional having to be involved, for want of a better phrase. Even in 1,000 years' time, there's going to be still people having hiccups in their lives. But if we can find a way where you can do that without having to be drugged off your face, and you've got a bunch of tools and resources that you taught how to use them when things are going hard in your life, then for me, we've been a huge success.
And the last question is, earlier you mentioned 3 things that you're proud as punch about. You told us Waiuku Family Support is one.
Yes.
Are you allowed to share the other 2?
Yes, probably. The first one that I'm very proud of, and I actually spoke with people about it on Monday night, Tuesday night, whatever night it was, those councillors' inaugurations, and there was some reason why I talked about them, because the cousin of one of the councillors worked with me at Unitec. And when I was at Unitec, I wrote the world's very first Bachelor of International Communication. And it was unique, and it's reaching its time of life where it's right now, where we've got all the employment crisis and all the things that in writing the degree identified that these were going to become crises. Let's get in before the crisis happens. And so no one can ever take away from me that I came up with that concept and I wrote it and was the original thinker and everything like that. So I'll go to my grave proud of that. And my second one is, actually I should put in 3, probably 4. Anyway, I'm thinking politics there. I was general manager of Apprentice Training New Zealand, and I grew that, which is what's called a group apprenticeship scheme. We employed young people as apprentices and coached and mentored them through to success. And that was the target, was 95% who started with us must successfully become qualified. We actually were at 98% most of my time. When I started, we had about 60, 70 apprentices. When I left 4.5 years later, we had over 800.
Beauty.
And to know that we were transforming young people's lives like that, and why I still hold on to it is I'm actually connected on Facebook and LinkedIn to a huge number of those young people that started their apprenticeship under our scheme, and they all knew me personally. And a few years ago when when my trust fell over in Rotorua, it was one of my young apprentices, had been an apprentice, and it was a she, contacted me and said, "Bruce, are things going wobbly for you?" And I said, "Yes." She said, "Would you like a new job?" And I said, "Yes." She said, "I'm on a board and we need a new GM." And I didn't get the job, and I wasn't upset about not getting it. They made a very good choice in who they took on. But the fact that here was this young woman and it was me, because her coordinator didn't want to take her on, and I said, "You are taking her on," and insisted on it happening. And here she was wanting to give back to me because I'd given her the biggest break in her life. And you can't put a dollar value on that, because that's what life's about, helping each other.
Yeah.
Not pushing them over the cliff, but getting up there.
That's right. Yeah. And that's a good way to end, Bruce, that it's full of ups and downs, life,
yes,
but we help each other.
We help each other. That's how we win. Everybody wins.
That's right. And I feel like it's fantastic that we can capture a bit of your story. Still more to come. But for this episode, thanks everyone for joining us. And Bruce, thanks for sharing your story.
Thank you for the opportunity. Great.